Welcome to the Gain Service Academy Admission Podcast. In these episodes, we will explore all things related to gaining a coveted appointment to the Air Force Academy, Naval Academy, and West Point. And here are your hosts, Rob Kirkland and Trish Penrod. Okay, hi everyone. We're back after a little bit of a delay here. I know we've been putting on a few less podcasts than normal, but we are kind of doing them periodically here to talk about areas of the Service Academy that Captain Penrod and I deal with candidates, as well as things that kind of come up in our conversations we have weekly when we do check-ins with each other. And today's subject is intercollegiate athletics. And before I start here, I just want to see how Trish is doing. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Rob. I'm excited to talk about recruiting and recruited athletes.
Okay, well, good. When I was and I don't know about you, but when I went in as a plebe back in the late 80s or rather mid 80s, I was not a recruited athlete. I thought I was a pretty good athlete in high school. I ran track and cross country and found out pretty quickly when I got to West Point that my my running was not anywhere near what would make a competitive Division I athlete. And so it takes a lot to be a Division I athlete, and takes a lot of talent, a lot of hard work, and I certainly wasn't anywhere close to being that. But I really had no clue about what Division I athletics was, maybe beyond what I saw on the TV with football.
Well, sir, you got into West Point, so you must be a D1 athlete, right?
Yeah, I must be. It's like, what the heck, So you run a 5-minute mile, and you realize that that the average person who's running Division I track at West Point or an academy is running 4:30, 4:25 and things. So you realize real quickly that it's not gonna, that you're going to be doing intramurals. And then you find out you do intramurals, and then you are just about an average runner with intramurals at the academy. So you're humbled very quickly. But that was sort of my experience. But I didn't realize going into West Point how many cadets are actually athletes. And I think the number is somewhere around between 20 to 25% of Service Academy cadets are athletes. So that is something I didn't know, and it's a significant piece of the pie here, and one that I think that both people listening to this podcast who are who want to be recruited athletes, or are thinking about that, or thinking they can compete at the Division I level, and those who are not athletes, I think also need to understand what's going on here, because it affects, I think, the maybe disadvantages them somewhat for admissions versus advantages the recruited athlete. And so I think understanding the intercollegiate athletic landscape, I think, is important in, just understanding academy admissions. It's sort of something that isn't discussed very much by admissions. And I think it's something that you need to shed light on, because if a quarter of your class is coming in as, athletes that are Division I recruited, that is a significant number.
Yeah, especially compared to one of the big universities where, maybe it's 2 to 4% of the class versus the service academies up to 25%, 250 athletes a year for each service academy. That's a huge amount. So understanding the impact that has on the stats, right? We talk about the whole candidate score and your SAT, ACT scores. Well, that's why looking at the 75th percentile is so important for if you're not a recruited athlete, because a lot of those recruited athletes are bringing down those averages. So understanding that if you're not recruited is key.
Yeah, no, it's it's something very important. We have people that use our calculator for, and they, hit the 60th or 70th percentile, and they say, oh, that means I'm in, to the academy. And then, you got to realize just what you said is that, the whole candidate scores are drugged down a little bit by recruited athletes that, so yeah, you need that higher whole candidate score if you're not an athlete to be sort of in the running for a appointment. Of course, there's other things that we've talked about in the past, like congressional district, things like that. But in general, not being a recruited athlete, you need to be that much better in order to get in. So why the emphasis on intercollegiate athletics at the academies? First of all, we're told at West Point when you go in as a plebe that General MacArthur, who was superintendent of West Point and obviously one of the legends in the Army, said, "On the fields of friendly strife are sown the seeds upon which other fields on other days will bear the fruits of victory." And the idea there is that those cadets that are actively participating in athletics are going to be better prepared to win our battles on the battlefield in the future. And so that is continually used by Department of Intercollegiate Athletics or the Office of Intercollegiate Athletics at the Academy at West Point, and I'm sure similar bromides are used at other service academies to justify the emphasis on intercollegiate athletics. I can tell you that in other countries, the United States is very unique in this kind of focus on intercollegiate athletics as a emphasis. Like, for example, I took a group of ROTC cadets to the Portuguese military academy, and they were perplexed with the emphasis on athletics at the service academies and colleges in the United States. So it's not something, it's just something that's unique to the United States, and one could argue, whether or not that's something that's needed or not needed in order to make a successful officer. But in any event, it's present, and it's something that is what the academies emphasize, and therefore we've got to talk about it.
Yeah, I think it's critical to understand the landscape and what you're competing against, regardless of if you're an athlete or not, just understanding the playing field.
Right. And so, we've got, let's talk about this playing field as far as the different sports. And I know you've got some data on that there, Kent Penrod. So what are we talking about as far as, I know you gave the basic numbers, but how many different sports, what are we trying to field here with these sports?
So let's look at West Point as an example. West Point has 30 teams that they recruit for, and across the Corps of Cadets of about 4,000 cadets, 1,050 cadets are D1 athletes. So you're looking at 25% of the Corps, and those teams, baseball, basketball, football, golf, gymnastics, hockey, sprint football, women's rugby, lacrosse, rifle, men's soccer, swimming and diving, men's tennis, track, women's lacrosse, wrestling, women's basketball, softball, women's tennis, women's volleyball, women's soccer, and men's rugby. So quite a few different opportunities for recruited athletes. And, I think looking at what the 3 criteria that those athletes have to meet is fairly important, right? They have to be a successful cadet. So when they're being recruited, the coach is required to, okay, is this person going to be able to, listen to the rules at West Point? Are they going to make a good, successful cadet? Are they going to get through the academics? Will they become leaders? And then that leads into, are they going to be a successful officer? That's the second criteria, whichever service academy they're going to, that branch of service. And then the third one is, will they help the team win? And I think it's up for debate, right? What coaches really put emphasis on. It's probably more, will they help the team win? At least that's what they care about now versus if they're going to be a successful cadet or officer. But the important thing to remember is that every recruited athlete does go in front of an admissions committee before they're recruited and appointed. So keep that in mind, right? The coaches can't just pick anybody. They have to have there's some minimums for the recruited athletes.
Right. And they're filtered through the senior associate athletic director for recruiting and admissions, who actually interfaces, is the person in the Office of Intercollegiate Athletics who interfaces with the with the admissions department at a service academy. So the coaches don't go directly to the admissions office; they go through at West Point in the ODIA. It's called to go straight to then the admissions office and advocates for the candidate in front of the admissions board or the admissions committee.
So looking at those 250 athletes that are recruited each year, if you look historically, 20 to 25% of those athletes are winning their congressional district, which means that 200 of those athletes are not winning their member of Congress vacancy, their congressional district.
Right.
So I think kind of talking about where these nominations are coming from and how that impacts your chances as both an athlete and a non-athlete are important.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So that's an important point, is that 200 athletes do not win their congressional district. And I think that's a really key point here, is that there's got to be ways to get them in that are not winning their district. And so, we've talked a little bit before about the top 150, meaning the top 150, the whole candidate score, get in. Now, I don't know how many of those athletes make the top 150, but my guess is probably very few of the 200. So maybe you can take 10, maybe off the top there of the 200. Maybe then you're down to about 190 that have to find a slot other than the congressional and the top 150. Does that make sense to you? We're kind of, spitballing some of these things because the service academy certainly don't bring these things out, but does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because you're going to have some athletes who are very talented, athletically and academically, who probably are scoring in the top 150 of the qualified alternates, just because they have those really good grades and those really high test scores.
Right. So so that leaves us with 190. So let's talk about the two areas that they're going to get their appointment slot from. And so the first one, I don't know, do we want to tackle the prep school, or do we want to tackle additional appointees?
Let's talk about additional appointees first.
Okay, great. So additional appointees, there's 220 additional appointee slots for the academy, each academy. These slots are at the complete discretion of the service academy in order to award appointments to. So if we're down to about 190, we will talk about the prep school. And, my guess with the prep school is we're looking at probably about 60 to 70 of the slots are not from the additional appointees. But in any event, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. But there's 220 slots for that the academy has to choose individuals that based on what the academy uses as a criteria. So a number of those slots are reserved then for athletes, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, really, where do those slots? It's athletes and then just the class composition goals. So if there's any areas of the class that they're trying to bring up in terms of diversity or other determiners that they want to use. So, a good portion of those 220 slots are going to athletes.
Right. Yeah. My estimate is about 70% of those additional appointee slots go to athletes. Now, so you've got about maybe 40 or 50 additional slots that are for other people. Now, one of the benefits of these athlete additional appointees is of course the diversity piece of this is that about 20% of recruited athletes are African Americans, and those are a group that certainly is one that the Army wants to raise as far as a number of officers. And so the recruited athlete piece does get at that demographic group, quite a bit. So it does sort of serve a dual purpose of, getting the athlete in, but also increasing the African American population at the service academy. So, but the remainder of those, let's just say 40 or 50 slots, are also going to go to other, kind of what you were talking about, Trish, regarding these, the diversity areas and class composition goals. That can be, other minorities. That could be, it could be any sort of thing that the academy deems as as important to them. One of the other areas that we're going to talk about in a subsequent podcast of this is specific people that stand out as part of their activities that they do in high school, and in particular, one of the areas I know that is used as for additional appointees is our class presidents.
Yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms that you're opening right now.
Yeah, we won't talk. We certainly won't discuss that today, but we'll save that for for our next episode on kind of activities and kind of the impact that they have on the service academy admission. So then you're looking. So about 70% of those slots go to the recruited. 70% of those 220 additional appointee slots go to recruited athletes. And so that leaves probably about 60 slots remaining. And then we have a whole separate category, which is the prep school.
Which is interesting because they typically are bringing in 100 recruited athletes from each prep school class.
Mm-hmm.
And that is under the service connected nomination, instead of having to go through the normal route, just because of the fact that they're reservists, correct?
Right. So the prep schoolers, there's 85 slots for active duty and 85 slots for reserve guard, reservists. They don't say guard, just reservists. And so prep schoolers that are coming from high school, they don't go through basic training. So they're considered, I believe they're considered, I'm almost sure, actually, I'm sure that they're considered reservists. They fall under that 85. Now, there's some people who go to the prep school that are coming from active duty. And my understanding is they keep that active duty designation. And there's also 85 slots for active duty people. So active duty soldiers, sailors, airmen, depending upon, which prep school they're going to. And so most of those 85 reserve slots are used for prep schoolers. So there you go. So that accounts for the remainder of your recruited athlete class, are people that go from the prep school to and get that appointment through the service connected, as you say. So Trish, what's the dominant? What are the dominant sports we're talking about here? Because not all sports at the academies are created equal, as we know.
So true, sir. So true. Well, I think we all know here that football is the dominant sport.
Yeah. Well, all you have to do is just look at one of my favorite teams, USC, and go into the Big Ten to get an idea of kind of, everyone, just read the paper on a daily basis to see how much money is being generated in college football these days.
So true. So true.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in fact, there's about every year they're looking for 75 recruits for football. And 2/3 of those go to the prep school. So 50 football players are going to the prep school before they're actually going into the service academies. So, that's about half of the prep school,
Yeah.
recruits that come in every year. So that's
Was
a huge deal. Football, lacrosse, track, and wrestling are the big four for West Point.
Yeah. And why is it that they limit the sports going to out of the prep school? I mean, I know the answer, but I'm just curious if.
Of
Well,
course.
I'll
Of
go.
course.
I'll go ahead and answer the question. Okay, so at the prep school, it's almost like a red shirt year, right? And so you get your fifth year there, and they've got to have enough people to field a team, right? So to go against, like, I know the prep school at West Point goes up against, I think, local colleges or maybe community colleges in the West Point area. You got to have enough people to field a football team. You got to have enough people to field a track team, to field at least a lacrosse team, and so you send people to the prep school, at least the athletes, where you can form a team. Sports like I don't know, like volleyball, and
Swimming.
baseball. They just don't have enough athletes to form a team to go to the prep school to make it worthwhile. Because if a real good baseball player is being recruited for West Point, if you send him to the prep school, he loses she loses a year and just sits there at the prep school for a year, just, and not working out or not playing the sport. Right.
Yeah,
So,
that's
so I
hard to
mean,
keep that D1 competitiveness.
right. So you've got to, because they're sitting at the prep school learning, their, kind of, subjects to get ready for West Point or the other service academies. So generally, they're only going to send athletes to the prep school where they can field teams. And as you mentioned, it's only those 4 or 5 sports.
And I think looking at the reason why you'd go to the prep school versus the direct entry, and a lot of it has to do with their confidence in your ability to be successful when it comes to STEM classes, I think, at the end of the day. So your grades and have you completed pre-calculus and trig, what kind of SAT, ACT score do you have? That's going to be the differentiator between, can they sneak you into the class, or do you need to go to the prep school first to work on those math and science classes first?
Yeah, and I think that for a non-athlete, non-active duty service person, we oftentimes get asked about that. Is there a chance that I'll get picked up for the prep school? And we take a look at their transcript, and they've had calculus A, B, and BC, and all these AP courses and everything. And I tell them, it's likely you're not going to be invited to the prep school, because you just would be completely bored there. You'd just be not challenged, because most of the candidates that are going there are taking pre-calculus. You've already done that in 10th or 11th grade, and it's not going to make a lot of sense for you to, and the academy looks at that too. I mean, they look at you. I mean, you're better off if you don't get into the academy to take a year of college somewhere, join ROTC, as we kind of talked about in a previous podcast, and then recompete the next year.
Yeah, and just looking at the SAT, ACT scores. So, there is a rule that 10% of the class can have below, it's a 550 verbal and a 570 math for the SAT, and 25 for the ACT. So, you could potentially get in, but are they willing to take that risk on you? Or, if do you need more time to prep to make sure that you're going to be successful? Because at the end of the day, they want people who are going to graduate and get through the program successfully as a cadet.
Right, and you do retake the SAT at the prep school, and I believe they give you SAT, ACT prep courses and things like that at the prep school to get ready. So remember, there's also candidates coming from active duty that need a little bit more prep before they go into the academy also. So, it's not just athletes that are going to the prep school. It's also, active duty service members also. So that's something, to keep in mind too. So good. So let's talk about the process if you are a recruited athlete. I know that that sometimes people think they're recruited athletes. Some people think they can play Division One. And it was interesting because if you listen to, the senior associate athletic director at West Point, he says, not everybody can be a Division One athlete. I mean, even people who are really, really good high school athletes, are not going to play Division One athletics. And so, how does this process work for those who are kind of listening who may think that they can play Division One athletics? How does this process work there, Trish? How does this work?
Well, sir, I think it's important to consider the different people that are involved in the process first. I think talking about the difference between your liaison officer, so, blue and gold officer, field force officer, academy liaison officer, depending on what service academy you're talking about, versus your coach. And looking at the two different roles there. So your coaches are the only people who can recruit you. Your liaison officers are not recruiting you. In fact, they're really barred from talking to you about athletics in general. They can talk to you about your process, where you are. They can help you along, but they're really not going to be giving you any advice or guidance on being a recruited athlete. That being said, they can, if they see someone with a lot of talent, they can forward that person's name to admissions. They can give you the contact information for a coach. So just understanding the difference between the coach and the liaison officer is critical. Just to make sure, you're not blurring any lines.
Right. Yeah. And then, that's made very clear to, the alumni also that, there's limited things that you can do to recruit, but it's referring them to the coaches, where then the coaches can recruit based on the NC2A rules and regulations, which we know are very strict in regards to how you recruit athletes for the academies. So okay, let's just say the coach gets gets wind of you, or you are referred to and you reach out to the coach, or the coach reaches out to you. How is the coach going to screen out people to determine, and how are they going to categorize them?
Yeah, really good question. There's a few different things that they're looking at, but first off, they want to make sure that, are you worth recruiting? Like at the end of the day, are you going to help their team win? So how do they do that? They look at, tapes, they look at stats. If you're on a lot of sports have different sites that track stats, getting onto one of those sites so that your stats can be tracked. That's going to be helpful in showing the coach that you're competitive, you have a really good shot at helping the team win, because at the end of the day, that's what they want. They want players and members of their team who are going to push the team ahead. And then after that, they're going to be, if they send you to the admissions selection panel, they want you to be successful. So they're going to ask to see your transcript, your high school transcript. They're going to be looking for those prereqs, the math classes, have you taken 4 years of English? And then they're probably going to do some medical screening too, because that's such a huge thing that most coaches don't have to deal with, right? Is making sure that you're medically qualified based on the Department of Defense Medical Exam Review Board's criteria. And, we have a podcast just dedicated to that. So if you're interested in those common disqualifiers, but above all, that's really food allergies, asthma, mental disorders. Those are some of the main ones that coaches will be looking for, and they'll probably ask you about. But so assuming that they found you, they like your stats, there's a number rating, and you'll hear the term blue chip athlete thrown around, right? So if you are rated 1 by a coach, that means that you're being recruited, and that they're probably going to use one of the vacancies, additional appointee or whichever vacancy to try and and help you get in. Now, that won't necessarily happen directly from the coach, as we talked about earlier, but just knowing that if you're rated 1, that's where you want to be as a recruited athlete. And then there's a few other numbers that you need to know about. So 4 is the coaches looked at you and they're not interested for whatever reason. You could potentially walk onto the team, if you can get in as a normal cadet, not as a recruited athlete, but they've already looked at you and they've decided, no, we don't have any interest in pursuing recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, you're either a 5 or a 6, which a 5 means they've looked at you, but they're not sure. And so they're going to either to make a decision and say, yes, I want this person as a 1, or no, this person is a 4 over the course of the year. So they really just haven't decided on you yet. And then 6 means that you're new, you're not unrated.
Right. And so I know we're working this year with a recruited athlete. The biggest thing I would say that jumped out at both of us is that if you are a recruited athlete, you are going to know it. I mean, really quickly. I mean, they're gonna, there's going to be certain language and sort of code words that the coach is going to tell you that in other words, you're admitted, you're going to be admitted, you're, these kind of language that indicates to them after they pre-screened you that, that you're going to be admitted to the academy. On the flip side, if, you're emailing them and you're not getting a response, they email you nicely periodically, thanking you for sending in, your latest film of, your high school exploits and everything like that. It's likely that you are probably a 4, and that, but they probably aren't going to tell you that directly. Does that make sense, Trish?
It does. I wish they would tell you people, though. I want to know, I think students deserve to know where they are in the process, but I think a lot of the coaches tend to keep their cards close. I think it is important here to talk about that each team has a goal, right? A number of slots that they're trying to pursue, and coaches know that they might get someone to verbally commit, and that person might end up changing their mind. Right. So they will go above and beyond and recruit more athletes than they have slots for, which means at the end of the day, say there's 5 slots, 8 people have been recruited. 3 of those people are not actually recruited. You're not recruited until you have a written contract. And that's key. So even if you get a verbal affirmation from a coach, right? Until you've signed on the dotted line, it doesn't mean anything.
Right. And so the numbers are vary by each sport. Maybe take a look, if we look at the direct goal for, say, baseball, it's 14, football 75, gymnastics 6, rifle 3. I'm just kind of, throwing out some of the various sports goals, but you see that, that some sports have a ton of slots that, blue chip or, number 1, or rated 1, whereas other coaches have very few.
Yeah, absolutely. And knowing those numbers, right? If you're in a, like, for instance, rifle, there's 3 slots. That's so competitive.
You just, and they've got to be careful with who they commit, and you don't know, the coach is not likely going to tell you, how many other people are interested in, shooting for, the certain academy. So, so what we'll do is we'll post this as at the podcast. We'll post that the data for the class of 2024 for West Point for the what their kind of recruited goals were for the for that class year, and it'll to kind of break that out for you all. But certain sports get more slots, and some of these I know, for example, football. I mean, football brings in direct 75. Their goal was 75 in 2024 for West Point, And a certain number of those people are going to get cut, from the team also. They're not going to make it. So the coach, goes in there and they realize it's going to be a vetting process to a degree. So, you can see the emphasis, on fielding, certain teams and, and cutting certain people also. So coaches also have to consider, who's going to attrit once they get there.
Yeah, really good point.
Yeah. So good. So good. So what else do we want to talk about here, regarding intercollegiate athletics before we talk about kind of the impact on the average Joe or Jane?
I would say the main thing to know is that the National Letter of Intent Signing Day is an important day that happens in junior year, July of your junior year, and just keeping that date in mind, that's when you can officially be recruited. So, after that point, the coaches can recruit you. They can send you up to the selection panel, the admissions panel, and get the go ahead.
Yep. And I think another thing that came to my mind is the DODMERB. You talked about DODMERB here earlier. And, athletes do have an advantage getting waivers with the DODMERB. So if you are disqualified by the Department of Defense Medical Exam Review Board for, some issue, and there's a list of those, and you can go to our to our previous podcast that talks about DODMERB, the superintendent of West Point delegates the authority to the surgeon, United States Military Academy or United States Air Force Academy or Naval Academy to waive certain disqualifications. And so the Office of Intercollegiate Athletics at the Service Academy interacts with the surgeon to work on waivers for athletes and individuals that, so there's another thing. I mean, a regular person being admitted to an academy doesn't have the Office of Intercollegiate Athletics interfacing with the surgeon to get you a waiver.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's quite a disadvantage.
So I mean, you're a really good athlete and you're going to impact the football team, and you need that waiver, and they could certainly give you a waiver and consider you for that, whereas a normal candidate may not necessarily be considered in the same way, because the waivers are completely at the discretion and needs of the service, and that's so we work with candidates each year. What is there? Am I going to get a waiver or not for a service academy? And the answer is that, first of all, you have to be considered competitive for admission. But second is that you may not get that waiver versus someone else, an athlete may get that waiver. And so you've got to, so it's completely up to the discretion of the academy to grant those waivers.
Yeah, that's such an important note to make too, because a lot of times we talk about the common disqualifiers and, which ones are easier to waive. But I think you're right. That absolutely goes out the door when you have a whole team of people that are advocating on your behalf behind closed doors.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not to give the impression that they're going to waive, things that just can't be, waived. But there's a lot of discretion on waivers, that can be done for the needs of the service, and it's they are used for athletes and they are being advocated there. So that's just another kind of advantage that athletes have beyond kind of just the preferential admission that they have. So given all of this, there's probably the majority of people listening to this are coming to the conclusion that they're not going to be a recruited athlete for a Division I sport. So where does this leave them? And I know this is going to repeat some of the things we've talked about in the past, but where does it leave the average non-Division I athlete that's coming from high school?
Sir, I think if you're not a D1 athlete coming from high school, I think you should take the SAT, ACT early and often and try and get your score as high as possible.
Right. Yeah, because if you realize that the SAT or ACT and the whole candidate score is somewhere around 40% overall of the whole candidate score, and then of the your GPA rank in class is being de-emphasized, but your GPA and your rigor of your courses and the rigor of your high school is another 20%. But yeah, I mean, what you can control is that SAT or ACT, and so your goal as a non-recruited cadet or midshipman is to either win your district, that one slot for your congressional district, or get into the top 150. And so generally for the top 150, you're looking at over 1,400 SAT score with an emphasis on math over verbal as far as your scores go, because math is weighted 60%, verbal weighted 40%, or about a 32 ACT score. So that's exactly right, Trish. Is take these tests early, often the Academy Super Score, get into that top 150. If you're particularly if you're in a competitive district where it's likely you're not going to win your district.
And for, the high school freshmen and sophomores that are listening to this right now is your opportunity to really set yourself up for success, because at the end of the day, all the service academies are looking for future leaders, right? So developing that leadership potential and showing that there's a propensity for leadership is a huge deal. So I think this leads into the Getting Involved in Activities podcast, which we'll discuss here shortly. But just, finding things that you're really passionate about and throwing yourself into those. So you're a leader in your community and developing those skills now.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. And developing kind of your complete package early, so that when you are competing as an applicant, when you're a senior, that you've become the strongest candidate you can based upon the measures that they do for the whole candidate score, which consists of your SAT or ACT score, super scored, your rank in class, GPA / rigor of your high school courses, rigor of the high school that you go to is kind of a score there. Your athletics that you participate in high school, your activities, your score on the candidate fitness assessment, and then your application itself and interview, that all go into the final score here. So, when we talk about activities next time, we're going to talk about how people can kind of snag one of those additional appointee slots that are, you still have some of those remaining for, candidates that are really, ones that the Academy wants to bring in that's beyond the athletes and beyond, class diversity, class, goals. And so we can certainly talk about that here next time. But yeah, I mean, that's really what you're facing as a kind of non-athlete, cadet or midshipman trying to get into a service academy. And I think this point is often lost with candidates in general and parents.
Yeah, definitely. So hopefully we've shed some light on the whole process today.
Yeah. And, whether or not you agree or disagree with, the emphasis on the intercollegiate athletics at the service academy, it's not going to change. And it's one where you got to understand the field that you're playing on, and using a sports analogy. You got to understand who you're competing against and what the playing field you're on to get into one of these service academies. And that's really, I think, the central goal of really, Trish, you and I, and kind of what we're doing with us, is that we want to just shed light on the admissions process and things that the admissions and the academies don't really talk about as much, but you need to be aware of as you're kind of, doing your application. And we hope, that this podcast and episode is helpful for both, those who want to be athletes, and certainly, if you're a really good Division I athlete, certainly take advantage of this way the system is set up to help you get into one of these academies. And then for those who aren't, realizing the playing field that you're on and adjusting your expectations, but understanding that what you need to do in order to get admission.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power.
Okay. Well, good. Well, Trish, it was great. I'm glad we're back here with with this and another podcast that we'll do here shortly to get out 2 in a row. We know we've got our listeners are probably asking where the heck we've been, but we're here. You can email us at any time and ask us a question. We're more than happy to answer it. We haven't gone anywhere, and we're going to continue to do these, kind of on an ad hoc basis. But we're still here. We're not going anywhere.
We'll see you next time, sir.
Okay, we'll see you. Bye. You've reached the end of another episode of the Gain Service Academy Admission podcast. Connect with us at gainserviceacademyadmission.com. Love this episode of the podcast? Head over to iTunes, Spotify, or whatever podcast app you listen to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.